Hi friends, Max Elhash here on this episode of the Corpus, Animus podcast. I have TTT coaches Brandon Dorman and Mia Gianelli, who I'm pointing to that you can't see on the podcast to talk about failure and loss. If you're on the go and you want to listen to just the audio version, subscribe to the Corpus Animus podcast on your favorite podcast app. Get better at the sport of CrossFit alongside some of the best athletes in the world in our online training program, The Design. Head over to our website, trainingthinktank.com/DSGN to learn more.
You still have some scratches on your...
Let's talk about failure.
Yeah, I mean, that is failure to stay on your feet.
Yeah, I think that's probably a great place to start this podcast about loss and failure is you running into the assault bike.
What does it feel like to lose your dignity?
How many times do we have to talk about this? This is the second podcast. Yeah. After the throwdown, I fell over the assault bike. It hurt.
I want to start this with a story because I think that that's a great place to start.
Is it a bedtime story?
For me, it was.
Good.
Once upon a time, 5.5 years ago, I show up at Training Think Tank, and Max, who I think is very much out of shape, and Brandon, who I think is very much in shape at the time, Max challenges me to a workout of 10 rounds of 250 meter ski erg and 10 bench press at 185 pounds. And I think to myself, I can definitely beat Max at this workout. Well, about 2 rounds in, I realized it's not going to happen. And Max crushes me in this workout.
By crush him, I beat him by half a rep at 185 bench press. So it was about half a tenth of a second.
At the time, to be fair to both of us, you probably couldn't ski a 2-minute pace.
No, for sure. I was so out of shape.
But you crushed the bench press.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, though, I remember this still like perfect memories.
It's burned into his memory.
It really is, because I came here thinking that I was going to beat everybody at every workout, and then I get beat by my boss
and Kyle. And Kyle beat
in the same week.
Yeah,
and both of you didn't let it down.
Oh,
so
for sure.
What I guess the way that I'd like to start this is after that, I came to a conclusion that 1, I'm not going to accept workouts that I lose. And then 2, I'm going to make sure that I train for both bench press and burpees. And I did. And I think that I could beat you at that right now.
Yeah, we should maybe do that at some point.
And that was the last time Brandon ever lost a workout.
Yeah, but it was worth it. It was worth it to have that one loss experience.
Yeah.
How much better of a human are you because of that? More humble?
I'm definitely, definitely not.
And I'm a worse human because I won and I just gloated about it.
In all seriousness, I do think that kind of the first thing to think about with failure is failure is only a bad thing if you let it be, right? So the way that a good athlete or someone that overcomes things in life and learns from them are those that go through the failures, because we all do, and then figures out, okay, why did I fail and how can I be better at whatever that task was?
Yeah, I think failure as a negative thing in somebody's mind state is I don't want it to sound too much of a negative connotation, but I think it's an immature headspace to be in, because there's very few people that can go throughout the course of their life and get to a point where then everything becomes about winning, right? Like Michael Jordan or even like Tiger Woods, he's coming back into the sport and he won the Masters, but he's losing way more now than he used to in the past. Yeah. So everybody is going to go through that experience of dealing with losses, whether it's in sport or life in general. And when you're younger, you can kind of delude yourself to thinking that you're going to be this like, oh, I win all the time. And as you go through life, and especially if you try to stay competitive into your later years, you just lose more frequently. And I think once you start to embrace that, like, oh, I'm going to lose. What can I learn from that? Or how can I still enjoy myself and not beat myself up and chastise myself for sucking because I lost, and keep a positive headspace and keep momentum and keep my goals in check? I think that kind of just comes with maturation in general as an athlete or as a human.
Well, this podcast is called Failure and Loss, but those are two different things, right? Like I don't see failure and loss as they're connected, but they're not the same. So if you lose, that doesn't mean that you're failing.
True.
So
give me an example, Mia.
Okay. So I coach a lot of athletes who are trying to get their first bar muscle up, first ring muscle up. And it takes different amounts of time for different amounts of people. And I have this conversation with them all the time is you're going to have this session that you're going to do once or twice a week, and we're going to do it for as long as it takes. But if you look at each session that you don't get your muscle up as I failed, then you're never going to enjoy your journey. That's not a failure. Yeah, maybe you lost that day in the sense of you didn't get your first muscle up, but that's not failure. That's just a step. And that's how I see loss. Like you do a competition and you think you're going to win, but you get second. You lost that competition, but did you fail that competition or did you fail your goals? No, I think losses are steps towards whatever you're
loss can be like reflected on a leaderboard, but failure is really an internal mind state. You can't fail on a leaderboard. You can just be worse on a leaderboard and then context it in your head as a failure. But I think like in this sport, it's really about statistics. So if you look at Matt Frazier, I think he won like 4 or 5 workouts last year at the CrossFit Games, but that means there were like 7 or 8 or whatever the actual number is that he lost on. So if his goal was to win the CrossFit Games, he didn't fail that. He achieved his goal and was a success, but he actually lost at the CrossFit Games. So it's also like within a competition. So you did it like more as like in an individual thing or towards a specific movement goal or something like that. But I think it also applies to an athlete mindset in a competition. And if you view every loss as a failure, even in a competition in the context of the big picture, then you're probably going to suck over the course of the remainder because you're just going to have like a pouty mind state going into the remaining workouts.
Yeah. Right. The way that I would look at it is kind of going to the mind state first, and we can kind of talk about, well, how do you deal with the losses and all of that? But, when we talk about failures, I think it's okay to frame it as I failed this task. The next step, though, has to be, how do I get better so that I don't fail it anymore, or I get closer to not failing, right? Yeah. So the perfect example of this is like Rich Froning going from, failing the rope climbs. I don't even know what year that was. 2010. Yeah. I mean,
Graham Holmberg won.
It's crazy. He's been so good for so long.
Yeah.
But he fails that. And then he comes back the next year and he's like the best at rope climbs, because what he did is like, that's a loss. That's a failure. I'm sure he framed it that way because it was kind of burnt into his mind. Like, I've got to get better at these things. But what he did in the off season was, I'm going to train it. And now we've seen him, I think a couple of months ago, he did, 25 legless rope climbs in 7 minutes?
Yeah, 7:30, I think, or 7:25. I mean,
that is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
But he was failing regular rope climbs just 10 years ago. So he took that failure, that loss, whatever you want to call it, and he framed it in his mind of a way, yes, I messed up this year, but my long-term vision, long-term goal is to be a champion. And so to do that, I've got to take care of all these failures and figure out what my limitations are so that I can get better at this sport.
Yeah, like I'm never going to let this happen again after experiencing it. Yeah. It happened with Frazier too, with sprinting. It happened to him when he lost the games I think it was the final workout with Ben Smith with the kipping parallel handstand push-ups, and he blew up in that workout and Ben ended up winning overall. I think it's just a common thing that your reaction to the failure can actually lead to long-term success. But if your reaction to failure is kind of withdrawing and cocooning and trying to avoid feeling that feeling of failure or loss again, then you blunt your own progress.
Yeah.
So with that frame of reference, it's almost as if you should be seeking out failure. You should be seeking out or setting your expectations such that it's possible for you to fail or lose. And if you don't, that becomes more of a problem.
Yeah, especially in a sport like this where there are so many variables going on, you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations to get better at the sport, because there are always new things tested. So I have to try things that I'm not comfortable with, or I'm going from a 2-inch deficit to a 4-inch deficit, and maybe now it's going to be a little bit harder and I'm going to fail my handstand push-ups a little bit sooner. But those are opportunities for us to figure out where our threshold is and then how to get better at that task.
So for an example, like with Noah, when there was what year was that with the rope climb where he was in second and fell to fourth? 17. So that was a loss and a failure, I guess. How did you approach that with him after?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing was addressing like, what's the limitation there, right? Like everyone always has criticized Noah for going out too hot. So like, and he went out and he would think he was 1 rep ahead of Frazier in the first round of that workout. And everyone's like, oh, Noah goes out too hot. He blew up. So it was like, all right, is this a pacing issue or is this a grip endurance issue? Is it a technical issue? Is it when you hold your arms overhead in the overhead squats and then do rope climbs? I think for me, it's a lot about trying to identify the true cause or the true reason for that, as opposed to thinking of it as like, okay, well, let's just do 1,000 rope climbs and just keep getting better at rope climbs. It was like, okay, what was the headspace that you were in? So I think some of it for him was, oh my God, I'm in second place. I have to go out and keep it because the podium dream is going to be realized right now. So some of it was like managing expectations going into workouts, like almost like a act like you've been here before type mind state moving forward into previous competitions, which was really successful last year. Being in second or being in first leading in, I was like, you've been here before. Like now it's just about finishing the job and going out and doing the best that you can. Like, don't try to overextend yourself. Don't make any major mistakes. Like, let's just see what you can do. Matt ended up beating him, but I think just the way that he concluded was pretty solid as just an overall athlete there. Then obviously attacking the grip limitation. For whatever reason, maybe he's got smaller hands as an athlete, or maybe it's just the way that he's built. Grip endurance has been something that, limits him in workouts where it's barbell cycling and bar muscle ups, or barbell cycling, muscle ups, more so rope climbs than anything else. So that just went into his training a lot. And, the first workout of the games last year was running, snatching, and legless rope climbs that were high, and he finished high enough to keep him in a good position. So I think we've successfully kind of worked on whatever that major limitation in grip is.
Was there something that you had to overcome with him when it came to the mental side of the failure? Like, not necessarily how he's going to mentally attack being in that situation in the future, but did he have like a woe is me, or like any like really down mentality from that? So Noah doesn't seem to stay down very much. Like, he doesn't beat himself up too much.
Giddy guy.
Yeah. He's just a happier dude. Yeah. But he does sometimes go through kind of like swings, especially in competition, where he can kind of like get sad that something happened and have to like go through his little grieving process. But I think if I kind of rewind back to the state that he was in when we first started, he had just had his worst finish at the CrossFit Games. He finished 16th. He was kind of contemplating not doing it anymore. Like, am I as good as I've ever been? And I'm never going to get better. Do I want to go to the CrossFit Games and be that? And then to what we've done over the last 4 years, it's been a pretty steady, just like constantly pretty positive period of time where he believes like, okay, these goals that I set for myself, they're attainable. I'm enjoying it. Now he wants to be CrossFit Games athletes for a decade. So I don't know if we've ever had to like overcome that. I think it's just the discussions that we've had over time and his maturity as a human being and him finding purpose in this, maybe outside of winning, which I guess ties into failure. You can only really fail if you set the expectation on something super specific. So like, okay, I'm going to win the CrossFit Games is the goal. If you don't do that, you fail. But if you also have a bigger picture perspective that like, okay, I want to win the CrossFit Games, but I also want to earn money to be able to buy a house, to set up a family with my fiance. And I also want to set up a personal brand and have some sort of a career after CrossFit. And I have all these other things. Then the singular failure experience at competition doesn't ruin your sense of self. Cause it's like, all right, yeah, I failed that one component, but I'm a success overall as a human being. So I think he's been able to hold his head up high while not accomplishing the goal. And I think that's kind of been maybe the learning experience that I had with Noah is that like, in order to strive to be a champion, maybe you can have that perspective like, oh, I can only win and everything else is not acceptable. But there's very few people who are ever going to be like that. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. So I think it's almost better to build a very comprehensive self-concept that has a lot of other variables of success and then go out and strive to be the best. That way, if you don't make it as the best, you have this other stuff that allows you to just be feel like a successful human being. So you failed, but you're not a failure.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one winner every year.
Yeah.
Right? In every sport, there's only one champion. There's only one winning team, whatever it may be. So everyone else is failing, and even those winning teams fail, right? Like very few people just, even Frazier's not going out and winning every workout. And we can talk about that. I think what I'd like to kind of steer the conversation to is more of the listener, in that, that's kind of big names, like Noah's on a big stage and he has big goals. But what about for us or for the day-to-day CrossFitter, the one that's doing the smaller competition or the sanctional? We all fail still, right? I think back to competitions that I did in the past, and there were workouts that I crushed and workouts that I failed. What are your recommendations for those that are in the gym every single day, but maybe they're avoiding the things that they're not good at because they are afraid of failure, or those that have gone through a competition and got so embarrassed that they're like, I don't want to do that anymore?
Well, in order to integrate you into the conversation more, Mia, what was your experience? What was your experience like when you first got here?
So
we had just invited basically like a training group of athletes to come out here, right?
Right. So the goal that year was to have 2 teams go to regionals back when regionals existed. And there were, 20 maybe so, athletes that came into town, and I had just moved here from Orlando. My whole CrossFit journey has never been one of winning, and neither has my experience in sport. And I don't mean that in like a negative way. Like I'm talented enough to be competitive enough that I can really enjoy the sport and have, realistic goals that a lot of people in the sport can't strive for. So I'm not like downing on myself, but I came here and I used to train with a girl in Orlando who had been to regionals a bunch. I used to train with Danny Spiegel in Orlando, and obviously she's a games athlete now. So I was never the best. Like I never came from like, oh, like she's the really good one, but I didn't expect I was better than most. Yeah. I came here and we started doing this training group, and I think for probably about a year, if not more than that, I lost every single workout. And by loss, I don't mean I didn't get first. I meant I got last. And sometimes by a lot. And that was tough. Like, I don't think I'm a very like egotistical person, or I don't put a ton on like having to be the best, but it was really hard to be last all the time and to keep showing up day after day and compete with these people that are so much better than me. And like, it is embarrassing sometimes. Yeah. And I would like go to the bathroom between workouts and cry a little bit. It's just like, let it out. And then I go back on the floor and lose again. And I mean, it's just kind of like a cycle, but I've gotten so much better from it. And I've grown so much as an athlete, as a person, as a coach, because I feel like I can explain to my athletes, like, listen, like this is real life. Like if you hide from failure, if you hide from competition, then you're going to live in this little bubble of like thinking, oh, maybe one day I'll be this, but you're never going to be. Like you have to go out there and you have to lose.
Yeah. So I'm not picking on you because
Yes, you are. He always is.
Maybe a little bit, but I actually went through something similar. So I did CrossFit competitively, I'd say from like maybe late 08, early 09 until 2011. So it was like maybe 2.5 years. And I was super gifted in certain aspects of the sport. Like as a big guy, I just learned gymnastics quickly. I was obviously pretty good with a barbell. On short, high power workouts, I was pretty good. On the traditional CrossFit stuff, because it was like Fran, Grace, like their sub 3-minute workouts, I could actually be competitive with at the time was what the best in the world is. But outside of that, like longer running workouts like Nancy, 5 rounds for time, a 400-meter run and 15 overhead squats, anything that really extended past 10 minutes or had a high volume of gymnastics in it, open style stuff would kind of break me down. And in order to try to get better at that, what I would do is I'd try to compete with people at the things that I could win in my training environment and then train the things that I wasn't good at, so that I wouldn't be exposed in training to losing. So I almost created a little like competition comfort bubble. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I am in some capacity. And that had its own limitations for me as an athlete. And then when I stopped being an athlete and kind of focused on just getting myself healthy, I got really out of shape. That's what Brandon was talking about when we first started. Like when he came here, most of my training was just like rolling around like a gorilla on the floor, just trying to move and get out of back pain. And then when I got back into CrossFit, it's like, all right, now I'm, a 230 pound, over 30 pound guy who hasn't over 230 pounds, who hasn't done CrossFit in 4 years and doesn't do any long conditioning. And now I'm going to step into a training environment of people who are like, some of the best in the world. And I want to train with them. I want to take advantage of that energy. I want to learn how they approach the sport. And there was almost this like recalibration process of having like, who am I now? Like, what is the ego that's carrying me through training? Because it used to be, well, I want to win. Now it's like, well, I want to learn. I want to get better, but I can't get rid of that competitive side of me. So it was like a really weird process to just go through losing all the time. For me, it wasn't as emotional. It wasn't like, I'm going to go to
you don't have sadness. You just have anger.
Exactly. I was going to say anger and depression.
A different emotion for you, right? With frustration.
For sure. Yeah. But that process over the course of the last 2 or 3 years has led to so much growth in my understanding of movement, growth in my understanding of what I'm capable of accomplishing at things that I previously thought I wasn't good at. So that failure experience for me and just putting myself in an environment where I'm just comfortable losing. And then when we create, the throwdown and a global leaderboard and you can see it, you're like, or do the open, you're like, oh, I'm not really that bad. I'm just in an environment that's a bubble of people that are so much better than me that I'm losing, but I'm still pretty good relative to what my ambitions are as an athlete. And I think that process of failing was really like the ultimate learning environment for me. And it seemed like for you as well.
Yeah. Can I flesh a couple of these things out? I want to kind of go back and forth between you two because I think you said some really good things. So Max, first, you talked about and kind of alluded to the fact that you would train the things that you were good, or you would test the things you were good at with other people because you wanted to win. And I totally get that. What was the thought process behind going away from that and training all the things you were bad at by yourself?
What was the thought process back then?
Yeah.
Well, I think I created rationalizations like, oh, well, I'm bigger, I'm more explosive, I need to be doing this at lower intensities. And I created all these rationalizations that were like well thought out training physiology and research things, which were, they were probably good training mechanisms, but they were probably it was just me creating a justification for why I didn't want to put myself in an environment where I could lose.
Yeah.
I think there's probably something to that. If you really do have a major weakness, there probably should be some time spent on the little details. Like for distance running, for example, if I put myself in a distance running workout with somebody like Travis, that's silly. But if I do a bunch of preparatory work to get my feet ready that I can handle it, and then do a running workout to try to get a gauge of me versus Travis or where I could save time versus Travis, then it does actually make sense. So I think maybe I wouldn't go from where I was to, hey, now I'm going to compete with people all the time in my weaknesses. But I think there's a balance point where you just you need to measure up every once in a while. You need to have that humbling experience to make sure that you are making progress if you are training by yourself.
So how did you kind of adapt to that next thought process of, I'm going to put myself in an uncomfortable situation and be okay with losing every once in a while so that I am failing, but I can learn from those failures? Like how did you change or grow as an individual to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a process of, I think it's developing a human philosophy for myself, which is probably more stoic than ragefully competitive when I was young. I mean, I was a really sore loser when I was young.
Me too,
sure. Violently sore loser. Break shit, that, huh?
Example.
No.
I broke a couple walls, broke a lot of
my
stuff.
hand. That stuff is just, and looking back on it, I'm almost ashamed, but that level of intense desire to be better than somebody else, it gave me a lot of good skills. It refined my work ethic. But I think as I got older, I just realized that's not the adult I want to be. It's not the model that I want to give to the younger generation or even athletes that I coach. You go to a competition, I think you're displaying yourself to humanity, to the cameras and all of that stuff. You want to put something out that you're proud of. That's going to last. And if I'm asking athletes to do that, hey, you're going to go out there and that shit's going to be recorded that your kids are going to be able to see one time. Do you want to be acting like an asshole, or do you want to be acting like somebody who has some sort of emotional control and ability to think of themselves as not just a winner or a loser in this period of time? So for me, it was an attempt to try to build myself into somebody that I respected. And I think it was just fucking do it. Just go into it, feel the emotion, listen to the emotion, don't react to the emotion, don't act out. And just going through that over time, it's just you just adapt. It's like a training experience. But for me, the training experience wasn't physical. It was emotional. It was in my head.
Well, what I found, because I was the same way, I still am a sore loser for sure.
But and he doesn't lose that often.
I've learned how to control it. But I broke my hand punching a wall after a football game one time, and then I had to sit out. And so the thing about that is
ultimate punishment.
So I'm just hurting myself and my team and no one else, right? Everyone else is going to continue to get better while I hurt myself and my team. The one thing that I'm mad about, not winning, right? And so I think it can be such a detriment when we are uncontrollable with our emotions. So I guess one of the things that I've noticed, Mia, with you is that you, even if you went into the bathroom and cried, you always have been stoic. So how have you handled those situations of loss and frustration and failing, day to day with a training group that maybe was better than you at the time?
I think a lot of it was, I just really wanted to be here and be a part of it. And that was bigger to me than feeling bad about myself. I mean, what other option did I have really? Like I live here. I was hired to be a coach here. I want to present a good front for my athletes. And I also really love CrossFit, and I wanted to my goal was always to get to the point where I could be a solid teammate on a team that could at least chase the games, whether we make it there or not. Hopefully we do. Even if we don't, I want to be a part of that journey. And that was always just bigger to me than like, oh man, everyone's looking at me because I suck. Because no one is, right. Like you think that's the case, but everyone is so focused on themselves and push in. True. And and all the doubts you have about yourself, the person next to you, even if you're at this level and they're here, they feel the exact same things because there's someone else that's here that they are feeling insecure about, So it's, I don't even remember what your original question was, but that's totally fine. It was, I just dealt with it because that was the only option. And something I tell my athletes all the time is you have to be vulnerable. And if you avoid that, if you avoid putting yourself out there, if you avoid feeling failure, then you're going to lose opportunities for growth because that's how you grow. So just deal with it. Like that sounds so silly, but you go out there and you lose and you deal with it. And then you go out there and you lose and you deal with it and you just keep doing it. And one day you're going to be at the level that you were like upset that you weren't at before. But when you're at that level, you're going to be upset that you're not at this level. So that's just the process of sport and growth.
Yeah. I think I tell people all the time to have a big vision and have big goals, but also understand your current reality and then the path that you have to take to get there. And oftentimes that path is pretty bumpy and there's some cliffs that you have to kind of dodge and other things that are kind of along the way that you have to figure out. But like, if I have this big vision, even if I fail, I understand that is an exposure to a weakness that I need to clean up. There's a chink in my armor that I got to figure out how to kind of iron out so that I can continue to get better at the task that I want to get better at.
I think that's just a life, it's almost a life lesson that plays out through sport. And it's very easy to get complacent. And you don't even realize a lot of times that you are getting complacent or you have goals and you're not working towards them. But failure as a construct requires you to be striving for something, striving to be better tomorrow than you were today. And I think in some sense, it takes a brave human to look at themselves and be like, I'm not okay with what I am now, or I am okay with what I am now, but I want to be better. And how do I define betterness? You write it down. This is what I define better as. And then you work towards it and realize that you might not be. Because, life could happen. You could set this goal of being, okay, I want to do well, or I want to do better as measured by the Open next year. And then you end up getting sick the day before the Open happens. There's nothing you could do about that. And then you can't even participate in the Open. If you think of that as a failure experience, you lost all the growth and all the magic that happened leading up into it, and the work ethic that you cultivated and skill development that you cultivated. So I think failure is something that you accept as something that is almost an inevitable outcome when you start a goal setting process for yourself. But I think a goal setting process is super important. I think people should have goals about who they're going to be in the future and what type of legacy they want to leave, or what type of parents they want to be, or whatever it is. I mean, for us, it's largely through sport. Even as non-professional athletes, we spend a lot of time training and competing for things that we do either recreationally or just like as part of the media and part of the business and stuff. So other people, I think that same concept is true. Like, you have to embrace that failure is an outcome. That's okay. That might hurt. That might suck for a little period of time, but will make you better ultimately, and shouldn't ever deter you from striving for something.
Yeah, I would call it sorry, Mia.
No, it's okay.
I would call it a learning experience. That's just the way that we need to look at it. Is like, this is a learning experience. And I think it's almost more dangerous to just bypass those failures and be so okay with them that you're like, it doesn't matter anymore, because then you aren't striving for anything. That's not to say that you put all your weight as a person in that failure. But I've seen people in this sport especially almost give up and just be like, nothing matters anymore. And then they're not growing as a person. So it's finding that balance between, like, it should matter to you, but it should be a matter that is something that I'm going to learn from, and not just I'm going to bypass this and who cares if I fail every time.
Yeah, I think it's okay. And it's important to understand that it's okay to feel shitty when you lose. Yeah. And if you care, you're going to feel shitty. So the goal is to feel those feelings, be vulnerable, put yourself out there. You're going to fail. It's going to feel bad, but you're going to be resilient to those failures. And that's how you outlast a lot of people in this sport. And I can kind of use myself for an example there, because with that original training group that would crush me every day for a year and make me cry, I don't know where a lot of them are today, but they're not in the sport anymore, because some of them, because they were not resilient to losing, because everyone is losing. And therefore, like, if you can outlast those people and just be more resilient towards feeling crappy, yet still showing up the next day, then you're going to make a lot more progress than some of the people around you.
Yeah. It's not even, or maybe it is resilience, but I think of it more as emotional coping mechanisms. Right?
Emotional resilience?
Yeah, emotional.
Yeah, I mean,
resilience.
that is what it is.
Like you feel a crappy feeling and you either decide to allow it, like, I'm never going to do anything that can expose me to this crappy feeling again. Or you can say, like, on the other side of this crappy feeling is something that I want. So I'm going to keep exposing me to that crappy feeling because I'm going towards something that I want. It's like, I mean, literally, it plays out in every sport. But you were talking about golf. You know, you're scared of hitting the.
Talk about
yeah, Mia hates it. You're scared of hitting the ball out of bounds, or so you practice all the time on the range, and then you never go on the course.
Yep.
Never risk hitting the ball out of bounds. You've stopped yourself from being able to just feel comfortable to try to, like, swing freely. And I think it's compete freely, or whatever type of metaphor you want to use. The fear of failure and the fear of loss is the danger for everybody, because it just stops you from working. You have to just be okay with it.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting about this sport is that everyone loses, and it's okay to lose. It's just about not losing too much, right? So maybe that's something that we can kind of talk about. Like in a qualifier, it's less about winning all the events, and it's more about just being consistent. Or at the games, it's less about winning all the events and being consistent. In the open, you just can't have, if you want to be, let's say my goal is top 500, top 10,000, whatever, you just can't have that one event where you're 100,000, right? It's just about being consistent, all those things. So I think that that's a cool thing about this sport, but also maybe it should reframe what loss and failure are in the competitive sense.
Yes.
Blank.
Great point.
That was a good point, and I agree with it.
You know, speaking of loss and failure and making Mia cry, we're playing tennis tonight, and I am going to make sure that she cries.
I thought it was you and Jordan versus her and Kyle, and then I realized it was you and Kyle versus her and Jordan.
I think Jordan's the best one of
She
the
is,
four.
maybe.
So
She is the best
worst?
one.
I am definitely the worst.
Okay.
And I went into this saying, I am not good. I just hope I don't make it not fun. I hope I'm not
You hope
mad
you're
enough
not
that
so
it's
bad.
not fun.
Mia texted back in the group text and said, "I'm not good, but I try hard."
I do. Hey,
That's Mia's, like, life philosophy.
it really is. And you know, that sounds shitty, but I kind of like it. Like, I like it. Handstand walking.
Good.
It took
Hold on.
me,
Good isn't fair. You're not. You are good. You might not be.
I'm mediocre elite.
There you go.
It took me over 4 years to learn how to handstand walk. I would be hard pressed to find someone else who is on a sanctional level team who it took them 4 years. And I'm not talking like to handstand walk and be the best, like to just like make it sometimes, you know? And
Yeah. Well, maybe it took 4 years for some of them to learn it, but they were 4 or 3 when they started.
I mean, that is emotional resilience for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you just have to deal with it. And I don't know how else to explain it or to like get through to athletes. Like maybe it just takes time, and like you fail enough and you like throw a hissy fit about it enough and realize that that's just not doing anything, you know? So what is your other option? You either are miserable doing this, or you quit, or you just keep doing it. Yes, Chris?
Do you have times where you hid from the failure? Did the opposite of what you're saying now? Did you have times where you did that?
I don't think so.
I did. Mia's a better person. She's less scared.
No, I'm plenty scared. I just do it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why. It was never a question of like, oh, do I ignore this or do I not ignore it? It's like, I have this goal and I have to do this thing, and I'll just do it and I'll cry later and then I'll move on. Like,
Yeah.
I cry a lot.
There was a period of time where I was in here and I was framing every session consciously and deliberately after I finish every session, no matter what happened, as a win in my head. What wins could I take away from this session? And it could have been little things like I did this set unbroken. I did this. I was able to keep this transition to here. I set a pace and I was able to stick to it. And where I completely disconnected from the leaderboard or from the other people around in the training environment. And that was good to allow me to focus on me and my progress and building it literally was like a temporary headspace that I lived in where even though I was failing, like everybody around would look and be like, well, Max lost. But in my head, when I went away, all I felt was that I did something successful and won and moved forward in my process and in my journey. And that was pretty nice. It definitely developed a big like temporary ego for me where I felt like, puffed up like a peacock, like things are good. But it also held me back because I think some of the humbling process of engaging with other people and racing with other people is a motivating driver, right? Like people who are competitive don't really realize that they're motivated by losing. So if you're not losing, you're almost blunting your own motivation. You need to be in that environment to have peers or people who are better than you to push you and almost put you in your place to give you the emotional energy to continue training hard enough to be a winner in that future situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's kind of the last thing that I wanted to bring up is when I'm coaching athletes, I see two types of athletes, those that are just like completely afraid to lose and they never want to get in that environment. And those are the ones I try to push more into the environment of like, you got to compete and fail and kind of figure it out. And then hopefully as a coach, be the guardrails for them to have some emotional resilience, like you said, Mia. And then those that are in it all the time and they're just like, I don't care what happens. I'm just kind of beating myself down. And those are the people I want to pull back kind of more towards how I am now, which is process oriented. Like I'm not as worried about, obviously I still want to win workouts, but I'm more thinking about the micro goals that I have. Like I want to get better at the burpee technique. I want to get better at my muscle up technique. I want to get better at these certain movement combos and then continue to frame my mind. Like you said, that's a win for me today. I wasn't even competing against anybody. I trained by myself, but did I beat myself today? And that's kind of the goal that I have. So maybe as athletes that are listening to this, if you're someone that's always in the fire, maybe you should pull yourself out a little bit and be more process oriented. Or those that are afraid to be in the fire, you probably should make yourself uncomfortable by going into it.
You should come to a TTT training camp.
Yeah,
that you should.
One of the things that, as you were talking, made me think is I really think this whole process is about self-awareness.
Yeah,
it's what are you trying to accomplish? What type of person are you? What are your genetic and past training background gifts that you have that you can leverage, and creating a process orientation that allows you to have some sort of balanced distribution of winning and losing, because you do need wins or some sort of positive reinforcement. Everyone does. Everyone needs some form of validation. And I think the most powerful form of validation is self-validation. Oftentimes people seek it from the outside. They want more Instagram followers, more positive praise from their coach, more positive praise from their loved one. But like, for me, that has always seemed to be very temporary. Like you get it and then it's like, it's gone and you want more of it. Whereas if you find that validation in the inside and like, I like who I am and what I do, it's just with you all the time in your present moment, because it's your constant belief system about who you are. So wins are important, but the losses are what keep you humble and push you. So even if you're not leaderboard oriented, you might be like progress oriented. So like, hey, I want to be X% body fat or have this amount of muscle at this period of time if you're a body composition type person. Or I know that I'm inconsistent, so I'm going to set a goal of having an average of 5 training sessions accomplished over the course of 25 or over the course of like half a year, 6 months or whatever it is. Set those goals and those ambitions up for you that you can achieve them, but maybe they're extending you outside of your comfort bubble where you might fail. And I think finding that balance and finding that headspace and finding that process orientation is also just finding yourself. You find yourself, you do that, you almost actively seek out something that you can fail in. And then you realize too, like we're talking about loss and failure as if winning and success don't also have their negative sides, but they do. I mean, that could be its own podcast. There's a a movie on HBO called The Weight of Gold. And it's like, I think there's an article in the Atlantic that talks about how common it is for athletes to go through serious cycles of depression after the Olympic cycles or after big seasons are over. And I think that's a thing that is not often talked about in society. It's like, oh, losing sucks. And it's like, oh, winning is great. I'm like, well, is it? Like, you don't really know. There's so few people that have ever got a taste of that with the amount of money and isolation and constant attention and constant criticism on your life choices, that there could also be a negative consequence to always winning.
Yeah, for sure.
Good thing there's only 2 people.
Yeah.
Who have to deal with that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's not a problem for the rest of us.
And that's the end of this podcast. That's all we got for you, everyone. So
you want to do a little rap at the end like we've been doing? Yeah.
No.
No one's willing to do that with me. I don't understand. Hit something.
In the wise words of Mike the Situation, the New Year's, turn your L's into lessons.
Oh,
there's T-shirts out there too on his shop.
so embarrassed to be part of this organization.
The leader.
Go out there and seek failure and ignore them.